World War I was the first war of its kind. It stretched from ocean to ocean and wiped out many innocent lives. It is a very true statement that without weapons, the war's impact would be close to nothing. And with that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to the weaponry and technology of World War I by Kayla Hendricks. The weapons of World War I posed a tremendous impact on the overall results of the conflict. Many men's lives were lost due to the technological advances. A machine gun could destroy the face of a loving father. Poison gas could infiltrate the lungs of a young boy with dreams to one day become a doctor. These instances cause us to look at the war differently, and to fully understand the impact of this conflict, we must venture into this perspective. Believe it or not, machine guns were first used during the American Civil War. It was known as the Gatling gun, and was named after its inventor, Dr. Richard J. Gatling. The Gatling gun was a hand-cranked operated weapon. The bullets were fed into the gun through a bullet magazine located on top of it. Gravity was the main component of the gun. The bullets would fall into the barrels one at a time, and in a split second would be fired at once. The rotating barrel assembly would continue to rotate and fire multiple bullets, which gave the Gatling gun the unique power of over 10 single shotguns. Although the gun was an amazing addition to American ammunition, Hiram Maxim was the first to attempt an automatic version of the gun. Maxim's version was very similar to the Gatling gun, however it did not require any human intervention to fire it, other than pushing the trigger. The innovation greatly impacted warfare during the 1900s. In fact, it was Maxim's model that was used in the First World War. It was a weapon that all soldiers feared. All it took was a single inhale and your life could end in less than a week. The French army was the first to use it on the battlefield in the battle against the Germans. In August 1914, the French surprised the Germans with an attack that would be remembered for decades to come. The French used tear gas grenades containing XYLYL bromide on the Germans. The other most popular type of poison gas was mustard gas. Mustard gas was first used by the Germans against the Russians at Rita. The gas caused both internal and external blisters and sores to form within hours of being exposed to it. The damage done to the lungs and other organs was terribly painful and sometimes fatal. Many of the men that did survive the inhalation of the gas would later become blinded by it. Mustard gas was the most deadly of all poison gases at the time, and many of the effects took place less than 12 hours after contact. Death could occur up to 5 weeks after inhalation.
Keep a little cozy corner in your heart for me.
What you thought we was running done? Like I'm Carmelo Anthony.
There were many different weapons introduced to the battlefield. The tank was one of them. The idea for the tank came from a farming vehicle that could cross rough terrains using caterpillar tracks. Lieutenant Ernest Swinton was the most significant commander in the development of the tank, and he proposed that a new type of weapon needed to be created that could bypass any issues in terrain or environment, as well as violate the boundaries of enemy trenches. Believe it or not, the tank wasn't always successful on the battlefield at first. They were very slow and would often get stuck in potholes or remains of past trenches. However, this tool did come in handy and opened the door to a new form of machine warfare.
Throughout history, victory has been decided by what's going on down here on the surface of the Earth. Britain, for example, in the 19th century came to dominate the globe by controlling the world's oceans. But from the First World War onwards, warfare took to the skies, and now controlling the air is a key part of military strategy. And all that began with those brave pioneer aviators of the First World War. In 1909, Louis Blériot set off on a flight that would make history. His aim was to win a prize of £1,000 for the first plane to cross the English Channel. It wasn't the most elegant of flights and ended in a rather rough landing. But he'd made it. The plane he flew was a Blériot 11, like this one here. It's amazing it got that far. It looks so flimsy. Even more remarkably, this one still flies. Not exactly Top Gun. When the war started 5 years later, planes like this were still in production, and a few visionaries thought these might have a military application. With that, the first major air war had begun. At first, planes like this were reconnaissance vehicles. They were having a look at what was going on behind enemy lines and reporting back. But gradually they started actually taking an active role on the battlefield. Pilots were issued with these nasty-looking things, flechettes, spikes that if you drop out the side might hit enemy troops, or even bombs. Planes were now an important weapon of war. You gotta be kidding. There's no way I'd go up in this thing. This might have been the future, but it's pretty primitive. In fact, I feel like I'm sitting in a wicker garden chair surrounded by a sea of canvas. To steer it, you just move this column, and it's connected by a very flimsy-looking set of wires to the wings themselves, not little flappy bits like modern aircraft. The whole wings move, they twist. It's a system called wing warping. The engine is underpowered and prone to overheating. It can only fly at 47 miles per hour. It can only go at about 3,000 feet, no more. And as for the instrument panel, you get one dial, your oil pressure. That's it.
Much like poison gas, submarines were one of the greatest fears during the Great War. Another parallel was the fact that submarines weren't efficiently used until World War I. Their early use was mostly just for border and coastal defense, but the First World War really proved the U-boat's worth. John Holland, an Irish-American engineer, can be most credited for the creation and improvement of the modern submarine. Holland was aiming at forming a vessel that could submerge and maneuver underwater. His design became known as the U-boat. The internal combustion engine was the #1 way to keep the U-boats running. Sadly, the fumes and exhaust from the engine caused low oxygen consumption to be an obstacle in the continuing missions of the submarine. This flaw was one of the many issues that were improved and fixed in the Second World War. Although many flaws were found in the early submarines, they proved to be very efficient and reliable during the war, and many countries began using the stealthy machine. On May 7, 1915, the British ship, the Lusitania, was fired at from the German U-20. To Germany's surprise, there were American civilians on the Lusitania, and this submerged attack soon led to America's entrance into the war.
The German army first used the flamethrower against the French and British armies in the early parts of the war, 1914 to 1915. It was quickly adopted by both sides. The flamethrower has three main parts: the fuel tank, which held the oil or gasoline, the compression tank, which held compressed CO2 or air, and the nozzle, which held a lightable gas source. The two tanks were held on the soldier's back and connected to the nozzle by tubes. When the trigger was pulled, the compression tank contents would shoot out of the nozzle. The low pressure would then pull the oil through the nozzle at high speeds. The nozzle, being lit, would ignite the oil and burn anything and everything flammable within 25 to 40 meters for about 45 seconds. The problem is that the flamethrower is a very big and easy target to spot. If the enemy spotted a soldier with a flamethrower, they would do everything they could to take it out. This often resulted in a flamethrower bearer being blown up if the tank was hit.
It had generally been assumed that the first German airships would be deployed against England, and by the time of the first Zeppelin raids in January of 1915, German propaganda had made the British population nervous with their boasts that they would bomb England into submission. The first such raids were carried out on the night of January 19th, when the L3 and L4 dropped 15 or so high-explosive bombs on and around Yarmouth. The results were less than impressive, with 4 civilians killed and a railway power station hit, but the British government, feeling the need for improved home defense, began installing searchlights and guns around their key cities in southeastern England. London was bombed for the first time in early May, and again, no significant damage was reported. In the following months, more raids against London were attempted by the German giants, but these had, at best, a psychological effect on the English population and no real military value. On the night of June 6th, LZs 37, 38, and 39 took off from the Zeppelin base at Avere, Belgium, and set out for the trip to London. After barely heading out to sea, LZ-38 developed engine troubles and returned to its home shed. At about the same time the airships had lit out for their night's attack, several British aircraft of the Royal Naval Air Service had been dispatched to bomb the Zeppelin sheds at Avere and St. Agathe. LZ-38 was destroyed in its shed when Flight Lieutenant J.P. Wilson scored a direct hit after dropping 3 65-pound bombs from his Henry Farman biplane. Another British pilot, Sub-Lieutenant Reginald Warneford, and a Marine Parasol, abandoned his plans to bomb the sheds at St. Agathe when he stumbled upon LZ-37 cruising in the fog above the coastal town of Ostend. For 3/4 of an hour, Warneford stalked the German giant, straining to gain the advantage of height over his adversary. When he finally obtained a position from which to carry out his attack, Warneford traversed the length of the Zeppelin and released his 6 20-pound bombs. 150 feet below the Englishman, the dirigible erupted in a great explosion that nearly tossed the Parasol from the air. The roaring metallic inferno fell earthwards, spilling men and equipment before crashing to the ground, a mass of twisted and blackened girders. Only one crewman survived the destruction of LZ-37 after he fell through the roof of a convent and landed in a nun's bed.
The Big Bertha was a stupendous weapon in the First World War. His name originated from the inventor's, Gustav Krupp's, wife. This howitzer was used to demolish the fortress towns of Liege and Namur, and was successful, giving it a higher rank as a new weapon in the war. The Big Bertha was most noted for its attack on a set of Belgian forts, which were said to be indestructible at the time of the attack. However, the gun proved this assumption to be false. 3 days after the first attack on Belgium, all forts had been either destroyed or had surrendered. This outstanding victory led to the Big Bertha becoming a subject of gossip throughout the world, and many different countries began to invest in larger artillery as the war progressed.